Hello there, my dear friend. Come, sit with me for a while. The world outside has grown quiet now, and in this sacred space between wakefulness and sleep, I want to share something with you that has sustained humanity across all the ages. Tonight, I want to speak to you about virtue, not the grand, heroic kind that fills the pages of epic poems and inspires monuments in city squares. No, I want to tell you about the simple virtues, the quiet, steady qualities that shape good lives and create lasting legacies. The kind of virtues that are practiced not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary days. The kind of virtues that make not headlines, but homes, not famous names, but faithful friends, not celebrated achievements, but gentle inheritances passed from one generation to the next. The ancient Stoics understood this truth deeply. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled the mightiest empire on earth, wrote not about conquest or glory, but about simple, daily excellence. He wrote about doing what is right in each small moment, about treating others with fairness, about finding contentment with what one has rather than craving what one lacks. Seneca, the teacher and advisor to kings, built his philosophy around the idea that true wealth consists not in abundance of possessions, but in fewness of wants. Epictetus, who had been born into slavery and knew the meaning of having nothing, discovered that freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from the internal qualities of character we cultivate within ourselves. These wise ones understood something profound, that the legacy we leave behind is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give, not by what we achieve, but by how we treat others, not by how famous we become, but by how faithfully we practice the simple virtues that make life beautiful. Tonight, I want to tell you about 3 souls who discovered the power of simple virtues in their lives, about people who were not famous, not powerful, not wealthy, but who left legacies that endure through generations, about ordinary individuals who chose to be honest when it was costly, patient when it was difficult, and humble when recognition was possible. So settle in now. Let your body sink deep into comfort. Let your breathing slow and deepen. And let me tell you about a woodcutter who chose honesty over convenience, about a gardener who practiced patience through a lifetime of small efforts, and about a potter who discovered that true value comes not from praise, but from purpose. 3 stories, 3 souls, 3 lessons about the enduring power of simple virtues to shape lives and create legacies that outlast any monument or fame. Close your eyes now and let these tales of quiet excellence settle into your heart like seeds that will bloom long after the night's dreams have faded. The year was 1723, and the forests of northern Japan stretched across the mountains like a vast green sea, their ancient trees standing as they had stood for centuries, witnesses to countless seasons and generations of human lives played out beneath their branches. In these forests, in a small village nestled in a valley where mountain streams sang their eternal songs, lived a woodcutter named Taro, though everyone simply called him Taroya, which means the woodcutter's shop. Taroya was a man of perhaps 40 years, with the weathered face and strong hands of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. His father had been a woodcutter before him, and his grandfather before that. For 5 generations, the men of his family had walked these mountain paths, selecting trees that could be spared, cutting them with careful skill, and carrying the precious timber down to the village where it was used to build houses and furniture, boats and temples. The work required not just strength, but wisdom. A true woodcutter knew which trees could be taken and which must be left, which branches could be pruned and which must remain, how to fell a great pine so that it fell safely without damaging the surrounding grove. This knowledge had been passed down through generations, not in books, but in practice, not in words, but in the patient teaching of father to son, master to apprentice. Taroya had learned these lessons well. He could read the forest like a book, understanding the signs of health and disease, of age and vigor. He knew that a forest is not a collection of individual trees, but a community where each tree plays a role in supporting the whole. He took only what was needed, always leaving enough for the forest to renew itself, always ensuring that future generations would find what he had found. But Taroya was known for something else beyond his skill with the axe. He was known for his honesty in a village where many were poor, and opportunities for dishonesty seemed to multiply with each passing season of hardship. Taroya had built a reputation for absolute integrity that was almost legendary. It had not always been easy. There had been times when taking the easier path would have brought him immediate benefit. There had been moments when no one would have known if he had kept more than his share, had claimed credit for work he had not done, had stretched the truth just a little to avoid difficult conversations. But somehow, in all his years, Taroya had never done such things. Not because he feared punishment or hoped for reward, but because it simply was not in his nature to be otherwise. His father had taught him this, not through lectures or moralizing, but through example. He remembered watching his father return to a merchant in the next village, walking 3 hours through mountain paths, to give back a few coins that had been overpaid by mistake. When young, Taro had asked why his father had made such a long journey for such a small amount. His father had looked at him with surprise and said, "The amount does not matter, son. What matters is whether you can look at yourself in the mirror each morning and recognize the person looking back." These words had stayed with Taroya throughout his life. They had guided his decisions in business, in family matters, in the countless small interactions that make up a human life. And they would be tested, as he would soon discover, in a way he had never expected. One autumn day, when the mountain maples were blazing red against the evergreen pines, Taroya received a visit from a wealthy merchant named Tanakaya, who traveled the region buying and selling rare woods. The merchant was a man of considerable reputation, with connections to the great cities of Edo and Osaka, and his visits to small villages like this one were rare and significant events. Tanakaya had heard that Taroya possessed exceptional skills in selecting and working with the ancient pines that grew on the highest slopes of the mountain. These trees, with their tight grain and natural resistance to decay, were highly prized for building the finest temples and the most elegant private residences. The merchant offered Taroya a proposition. He would pay generously if Taroya would guide him to the finest stands of ancient pine and help him select trees for cutting. The merchant would handle all the arrangements with the local authorities. Taroya would simply need to show him where the best trees grew. It was an opportunity that most woodcutters would have welcomed eagerly. The merchant's offer was generous, and the work would have been easy compared to the usual labor of felling and hauling timber. But something about the proposition troubled Taroya. The ancient pines on the highest slopes were not ordinary trees. They were the elders of the forest, some of them more than 500 years old. They had survived wars and fires, earthquakes and typhoons. They were not merely sources of timber, but living monuments to the continuity of nature, guardians of the mountain spirit. Virtue 3. These trees were protected by ancient custom and local tradition. They could be taken only in cases of genuine necessity and only after proper rituals of gratitude and apology had been performed. The merchant's proposal, Taroya understood, was essentially to circumvent these protections for the sake of profit. "I cannot help you," Taroya said to the merchant. "The ancient pines on the upper mountain are not for selling. They belong to the mountain, to the spirits who dwell there, to the generations who will come after us." The merchant laughed, assuming Taroya was negotiating for a better price. "Name your price," he said. "I am prepared to be very generous." Taroya shook his head. "It is not a matter of money. These trees are sacred. They have stood for centuries, and they should stand for centuries more. I cannot be the one who helps to cut them down." The merchant's expression changed from amusement to irritation. "You are a fool," he said sharply. "You could have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Instead, you throw it away because of superstitious nonsense about sacred trees." Taroya remained calm. "Perhaps I'm a fool, but I would rather be an honest fool than a prosperous one who has betrayed his ancestors and his descendants." The merchant left in anger, warning Taroya that he would find others who were less scrupulous, that the ancient pines would fall whether Taroya helped or not. And indeed, within a few months, Taroya heard that other woodcutters had been hired to guide the merchant to the upper slopes. Trees that had stood for centuries were felled and carried away to become the foundations of wealthy men's houses and the polished floors of merchants' counting rooms. Taroya felt the loss deeply. He walked the mountain paths where the great trees had once stood and felt the absence like a wound. But he did not regret his decision. He knew that he had chosen correctly, that the integrity of his conscience was worth more than any payment he might have received. Years passed as years do, bringing their share of joy and sorrow to Taroya's life. His wife, whom he had loved deeply, fell ill and died in the winter of his 52nd year, leaving him alone in their small house with only memories for company. His son, who had shown promise as a woodcutter, was killed in a border dispute between rival domains, leaving Taroya without an heir to pass his knowledge to. His health began to fail as the years accumulated, and he found himself increasingly unable to climb the mountain paths he had walked for most of his life. But through all these losses and limitations, Taroya maintained his integrity. When he could no longer work as a woodcutter, he supported himself by making simple wooden toys for the village children, each one crafted with the same care and attention he had once given to the finest temple beams. When younger woodcutters came to him for advice, he shared his knowledge freely, refusing the gifts they offered because, he said, knowledge that was meant to serve the community should not be bought and sold. And in his final years, something remarkable began to happen. The village that had once seemed indifferent to his example began to take notice. Young men who had been tempted by the merchant's offers of easy money remembered Taroya's refusal and chose to follow his path instead. Parents taught their children the story of the woodcutter who would not sell the ancient pines, using it as an example of what it meant to have character. But the most beautiful legacy was yet to come. A generation after Taroya's death, the village faced a crisis. A wealthy lord from the capital wanted to purchase the mountain forest and convert it into a timber plantation, replacing the ancient mixed growth with fast-growing monocultures that would bring quick profits. The villagers, many of whom had forgotten their ancestors' ways, were tempted by the money that was offered. Then, during a village meeting to discuss the offer, an old woman stood up. She was the great-granddaughter of Taroya, a woodcutter who had died more than 50 years before. She reminded the villagers of her great-grandfather's choice, of his refusal to sell what could not be replaced, of his belief that some things were more valuable than money. Her words stirred something in the community's memory. Old stories were recalled, old ways were discussed, and slowly the villagers came to remember what their ancestors had known, that the forest was not merely a resource to be exploited, but a trust to be preserved. They voted to reject the Lord's offer, to protect the remaining ancient trees, and to revive the traditional practices of sustainable forestry that Taroya had practiced. Today, more than 3 centuries later, the forest still stands on that mountain. Some of the trees that were ancient in Taroya's time are ancient still. Their branches home to birds and squirrels, their roots drinking from the same mountain streams. And in the village below, the descendants of those who once considered selling the forest tell their children the story of the woodcutter who chose integrity over profit, who preserved what could not be replaced, who left a legacy not of wealth, but of wisdom. They do not know his face or speak his name, but they know what he represented. And in their choice to protect what he protected, to value what he valued, his simple virtue continues to shape their world. And now, my friend, the second story, The Patient Gardener. The year was 1560, and the city of Suzhou lay like a jewel in the fertile lands along the Yangtze River. In this city of canals and gardens, where scholars and merchants vied for prestige, and poets composed verses about the beauty of lotus blossoms and willow trees, there lived a humble gardener named Mei Lin. She was a woman of perhaps 30 years, with calloused hands and steady eyes, who had been gardening since she was old enough to hold a trowel. Mei Lin's garden was not famous like the great estates of the wealthy officials, with their elaborate pavilions and imported rocks, their elaborate water features and rare imported flowers. Her garden was small, just a plot of land behind her modest house in a quiet neighborhood, and it contained no treasures that would excite the envy of collectors. But those who had the privilege of visiting her garden spoke of it in hushed tones of wonder, for there was something about it that could not be found in the most elaborate estates. The secret of Mei Lin's garden was patience. While other gardeners rushed to produce impressive displays, Mei Lin understood that true beauty required time. She planted seeds and waited for them to germinate, not with anxiety, but with quiet anticipation. She pruned her roses and knew that the cuts she made this year would shape the blooms of years to come. She trained her wisteria, vines along the trellis, and understood that the cascading flowers she dreamed of might not appear for a decade or more. This philosophy of patience extended beyond the garden into every aspect of Mei Lin's life. She had married a scholar named Wei Chen, who had spent years preparing for the imperial examinations that might bring him the success and prestige that both of them craved. While he studied, she tended the garden and supported the household with her careful management of their limited resources. Wei Chen was a man of considerable ability, but he was also impatient. He wanted success quickly, recognition immediately, the rewards of achievement without the long years of preparation that true mastery required. Each time he failed the examinations, as he did 3 times during their marriage. He grew more frustrated, more bitter, more convinced that the world was unfair and that his talents were being wasted. Mei Lin listened to his complaints with sympathy, but offered no easy comfort. She knew, from her years of watching seeds grow into flowers, that achievement required time. She knew that the bamboo plant, which her father had taught her to cultivate, spends years developing its root system underground before it sends up its famous shoots that can grow several feet in a single day. The patience was not wasted time. It was essential preparation for later growth. "You must trust the process," she told her husband gently. "The examinations are not the measure of your worth, and failure is not the end of your journey. What matters is how you grow through your efforts, whether you become a better person through the discipline of study." But Wei Chen could not hear these words with patience. He wanted results, and he wanted them now. He began to spend his time with other frustrated scholars who shared his bitterness, drinking wine and complaining about the corruption of the examination system, the unfairness of the reviewers, the blindness of officials to true talent. Years passed, as they do, bringing both joy and sorrow. Mei Lin's parents died, and she grieved them with the same patience she brought to all things, allowing her sorrow to flow through her without being overwhelmed by it. She gave birth to a daughter whom they named Wei Lian, and poured into the child's upbringing the same care and attention she gave to her garden. She continued to study the classical texts that her husband had abandoned, finding in them wisdom that helped her understand the cycles of life and the importance of patience. Wei Chen's impatience grew into something more troubling. He began to take shortcuts in his studies, relying on memorized phrases and formulaic compositions rather than developing genuine understanding. He sought connections with officials who might help him bypass the normal channels of advancement. He even, on one shameful occasion, paid a scribe to produce a brilliant essay that he submitted as his own work. When Mei Lin discovered this deception, she was heartbroken, not because the plan had failed. It had, and Wei Chen had been caught and disgraced, but because her husband had betrayed his own character. She found him in their garden, sitting amid the flowers and trees he had neglected for so long, his face drawn with shame and despair. "I have thrown everything away," he said bitterly. "My reputation, my prospects, our future. I am nothing now." May Lin sat beside him on the stone bench, where they had shared so many quiet evenings. The garden was beautiful around them, the result of years of patient cultivation. Camellia bushes were in bloom, their flowers like spots of crimson snow. A small stream, which Mei Lin had diverted from a nearby canal years before, murmured softly over smooth stones. A centuries-old plum tree, which Mei Lin had rescued from a construction site and transplanted piece by piece, was beginning to show the first buds of spring. "Do you know why this garden is beautiful?" Mei Lin asked quietly. Wei Chin shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. "Because I have never rushed it," she said. "When I planted that plum tree, it was nothing but a broken branch with a few roots. I could have thrown it away and bought a healthy tree from the nursery. Instead, I planted it carefully, protected it through its first difficult years, and waited for it to recover. It took 7 years before it bloomed, 7 years of patient care for a few flowers. But those flowers were more precious to me than any I could have bought, because I knew what they had cost." She gestured to the garden around them. "Everything here has a history. The path stones were carried from a riverbed, one by one, over many years. The bamboo grove was planted from a single shoot that took 5 years to establish itself. The pond was dug by hand over the course of a winter, and I waited another 2 years before introducing fish because I wanted the ecosystem to stabilize first." She turned to face her husband directly. "This garden is not just a collection of plants and stones. It is a record of patience. Each element represents hours of effort, years of waiting, and countless small choices to continue when it would have been easier to give up." Wei Chen looked around with new eyes, seeing the garden not as a pleasant backdrop to his life, but as a testament to what patience could accomplish. "Failure is not the end," Mei Lin continued. "It is part of the process. Every master was once a beginner. Every expert was once a novice who made many mistakes. The question is not whether you will fail. Of course you will fail, as everyone fails, but whether you will learn from your failures and continue to grow. Will you be like the bamboo, strengthening your roots underground even when nothing seems to be happening above ground? Or will you be like a flash flood, impressive for a moment, but leaving nothing behind?" These words sank into Wei Chen's heart like water into dry soil. He realized that his entire approach to life had been wrong. He had been seeking quick results instead of genuine growth, external validation instead of internal development, the appearance of success instead of the substance of wisdom. From that day forward, Wei Chen changed. He began to study again, but with a different attitude. Instead of memorizing formulas, he sought to understand. Instead of blaming others for his failures, he examined his own shortcomings. Instead of seeking shortcuts, he embraced the long path of patient development. The years that followed were not easy. Wei-Chen had to rebuild his reputation from almost nothing. He took a modest position, teaching village children, using the opportunity to deepen his own understanding while helping others learn. He continued to fail the imperial examinations several more times, but each failure taught him something, and each failure found him more patient, more humble, more genuinely wise. And Mei Lin continued her work in the garden, training new plants, nurturing old ones, waiting with quiet expectation for the beauty that each season would bring. She taught her daughter, Wei Lian, the lessons she had learned, not through lectures, but through example. She showed her daughter how to plant a seed and trust the process, how to prune a branch and wait for new growth, how to tend a garden year after year without demanding immediate results. When Wei Lian grew up, she became a teacher herself, famous for her patience with struggling students, her ability to see potential where others saw only failure, her faith in the power of steady effort over time. She wrote books about education that emphasized the importance of patience and long-term thinking, books that would be studied for centuries after she was gone. And Wei-Chen, after nearly 2 decades of patient effort, finally passed the imperial examinations, but by then, the success meant less to him than the journey. He had learned that the real achievement was not the credential, but the development of character that the preparation had required. When he returned home from the capital, where he had received his degree and offers of prestigious positions, the first place he went was the garden. Mei Lin was there, as she always was, tending the plants that had been her life's work. The garden was more beautiful than ever, a living testament to decades of patient cultivation. "I owe everything to you," Wei-Chen said to his wife. "You taught me that patience is not passive waiting, but active preparation. You showed me that failure is not the end, but part of the journey. You demonstrated through this garden that the greatest achievements require the longest preparation." Mei Lin smiled, the smile of someone who had found peace through patience. "We built this together," she said. "You in your study, I in my garden. We both learned the same lesson, that the simple virtue of patience is the foundation of all other virtues, the quiet strength that transforms small efforts into lasting legacies." Years later, when both Mei Lin and Wei-Chen had passed away, their garden became famous throughout China. Scholars came to see the ancient trees and flowering shrubs, to walk the paths that had been worn by patient feet over decades, to learn the lessons that the garden seemed to teach about the nature of time and growth. And in the garden's heart, there was a stone tablet with an inscription written by Wei-Chen in his final years. It read, "Here my wife, Mei Lin, taught me the most important lesson of my life, that patience is not merely a virtue, but a way of understanding the world. She showed me that the bamboo spends years growing roots before it shoots toward the sky, that the artist practices 1,000 strokes before the masterpiece emerges, that the wise person plants seeds of character knowing that the harvest will come in its own time. This garden is her monument, but more than that, it is her teaching, still speaking to all who have eyes to see and patience to listen." And now, my friend, the next story. The year was 430 BC, and the city of Athens was at the height of its glory. The Parthenon gleamed white on the Acropolis, its newly carved marble reflecting the Greek sun like a beacon of civilization. The agora below bustled with merchants and philosophers, statesmen and slaves, all participating in the great experiment of democracy that was transforming the ancient world. In this city of genius and glory, where playwrights competed for prizes and philosophers debated the nature of the good life, there lived a potter named Sostratus, who made pottery so beautiful that people came from distant cities to purchase his work. Sostratus was a man of 50 years with skilled hands that could shape clay into forms of exquisite grace and eyes that could see beauty where others saw only raw material. His workshop, located in the ceramic district of Athens, was filled with vases and amphorae, cups and bowls, each one bearing his signature mark that guaranteed its quality and authenticity. His pottery was prized not only for its practical excellence, but for its artistic beauty. While other potters produced serviceable vessels, Sostratus created works that seemed almost alive with movement and energy. His paintings of gods and heroes, of athletes and philosophers, captured something of the Greek spirit, the love of beauty, the追求 of excellence, the conviction that even humble crafts could be raised to the level of art. Because of this reputation, Sostratus commanded prices that made him a comfortable living, though not a wealthy one. He could have charged more, could have restricted his production to create artificial scarcity, could have marketed his work as luxury goods for the wealthy. But he chose instead to make his pottery available at fair prices, believing that beautiful things should be accessible to ordinary people, not just to the rich and powerful. This choice reflected something deeper in Sostratus's character. He had learned through years of practice and reflection that true value comes not from external validation, but from internal quality. He had learned that the applause of crowds and the admiration of the powerful are hollow rewards compared to the satisfaction of doing excellent work for its own sake. His father had taught him this lesson, though his father had been a simple farmer with no education in philosophy. When young Sostratus had shown early talent for shaping clay, his father had taken him to visit a famous sculptor in the neighboring city. The sculptor had praised the boy's work and predicted great things for him. "People will admire you," the sculptor had said. "They will pay great sums for your creations. You will become famous throughout Greece." Young Sostratus had been delighted by these words, imagining the glory that awaited him. But his father, who had listened in silence, had pulled him aside after they left the sculptor's workshop. "My son," he had said, "I want to tell you something important. Do not seek fame. Do not chase after the admiration of crowds. These things are like shadows. They seem real, but they pass away when the sun moves. Instead, seek to do excellent work. Seek to serve others well. Seek to become the best person you can be. If you do these things, fame may or may not come, but you will have something that no one can take away from you." These words had shaped Sostratus's entire approach to his craft. He focused not on becoming famous, but on becoming skilled. He measured his success not by the prices people paid, but by the quality of his work. He treated each piece he created as an opportunity for excellence, regardless of whether it would be purchased by a common citizen or displayed in a noble house. This philosophy had made him respected among those who knew him, but it had also made him some enemies among his competitors. They resented his success, his reputation, his apparent indifference to the status games that consumed the Athenian artistic community. They whispered that his work was overrated, that his prices were too high for someone of his background, that he was arrogant to think himself better than others. Sostratus heard these whispers, but did not let them disturb his peace. He knew that criticism comes to anyone who does anything of value, and he had learned to distinguish between criticism that could help him improve and criticism that was merely the expression of envy or malice. One year, a great competition was announced to select the artist who would create the ceremonial vessels for the upcoming Panathenaic Festival, the most important religious celebration in Athens. The competition was open to all artists, and the winner would receive not only substantial payment, but also public recognition that would bring prestige and future commissions. Sostratus's competitors saw this as their opportunity to humble the proud potter. They submitted their finest work, confident that their pieces were at least equal to anything Sostratus could produce. They campaigned among the judges, pointing out what they saw as flaws in Sostratus's work, emphasizing their own connections and qualifications. Sostratus, meanwhile, approached the competition with his usual quiet focus. He did not campaign for votes or criticize his rivals. He simply worked on his entry with the same care and attention he brought to all his projects, trying to create the finest piece he was capable of making. When the day of judgment arrived, Sostratus's competitors were astonished by what they saw. His submission was not the elaborate, attention-grabbing piece they had expected, but a simple amphora of classical beauty, elegant proportions, harmonious colors, a painting of Athena that captured the goddess's wisdom and strength without any of the showy flourishes that other artists used to impress judges. The judges examined all the submissions carefully, discussing them among themselves in low voices. Finally, they announced their decision. Sostratus had won. His amphora would be used in the festival, and he would receive the traditional prize of olive oil and public recognition. But something unexpected happened. When the herald called Sostratus forward to receive his prize, he hesitated. The crowd waited, puzzled. Had the old man not heard? Did he not understand the honor being offered? Sostratus stepped forward, but instead of accepting the prize, he spoke to the judges and the assembled crowd. "Honorable judges," he said, "I am grateful for your recognition of my work, but I must tell you that I cannot accept this prize in good conscience." A murmur ran through the crowd. What could this mean? Was the potter mad? Was he trying to create a dramatic gesture for attention? Sostratus continued, "My competitor, Phidias the Younger, has submitted a piece that is in every way equal to my own. In some respects, in the boldness of his design, in the innovation of his technique, his work exceeds mine. I won this competition not because my piece is objectively better, but because the judges, in their wisdom, found something in my work that resonated with them. But that does not make me a better artist than Phidias. It only means that our styles are different, and that this particular group of judges responded to my style." He turned to face Phidias, who stood frozen with surprise. "I propose that we share the commission. Let both of our works be used in the festival. Let both of us receive recognition. Let this be an opportunity to demonstrate that art is not a competition, but a collaboration, that beauty takes many forms, and that the admiration of one person does not diminish the worth of another." The crowd was silent, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented gesture. Some thought Sostratus was being foolish, throwing away the recognition he had earned. Others thought he was being cunning, creating a bigger drama by appearing to be humble. But those who knew him well understood that his offer was genuine, that he truly believed that sharing the honor was the right thing to do. After a moment of consultation, the judges agreed to Sostratus's proposal. Both his work and Phidias's would be used in the festival, and both artists would receive recognition. And in the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Phidias, who had expected to feel humiliated by his loss, Instead, found himself feeling something unexpected: gratitude. He had expected Sostratus to parade his victory, to remind everyone of his superior skill. Instead, Sostratus had elevated him, had acknowledged his worth, had shared the recognition that could have been his alone. Moved by this generosity, Phidias sought out Sostratus and asked him why he had made such a gesture. Sostratus smiled and explained what his father had taught him years before: that true value comes not from external validation, but from internal quality, that the admiration of crowds is a shadow that passes away, that what matters is not winning, but doing excellent work and treating others with fairness and respect. You see, Sostratus said, I did not lose anything by sharing the prize with you. I still did excellent work. I still served the festival with my best effort, and I gained something that the prize alone could not have given me: the satisfaction of knowing that I acted with integrity, that I treated a fellow artist with the respect he deserved, that I upheld the principles I believe in. From that day forward, Sostratus and Phidias became friends, collaborating on projects and supporting each other's work. They demonstrated to the Athenian artistic community that excellence and generosity were not opposites, but companions, that one could be both a great artist and a good person. Years passed, as they always do, bringing both triumph and tragedy to Sostratus's life. He continued to make pottery, but he also took on apprentices, passing on not just his techniques, but his philosophy. He taught them that the goal was not to become famous, but to become skilled, not to defeat competitors, but to serve customers, not to accumulate wealth, but to live with contentment. When he died in his 80s, surrounded by students and friends who had come to honor him, there was no grand monument or elaborate tomb, but his legacy lived on in the countless potters he had taught, in the workshops that continued to produce beautiful work in his tradition, in the philosophy of excellence and humility that had shaped an entire craft. 2.5 millennia later, archaeologists would discover fragments of Sostratus's pottery and excavations throughout the Mediterranean world. They would study his techniques and marvel at his skill. They would write about him in academic journals and discuss him in museum lectures. But the most enduring legacy was not in museums or academic papers. It was in the pottery workshops throughout Greece and beyond, where master craftsmen still taught their apprentices the principles that Sostratus had articulated, that quality matters more than quantity, that character matters more than fame, that doing excellent work for its own sake is the highest form of achievement. And in the story that continued to be told about him, the story of how he gave up a solo victory to share the honor with a competitor, There was a lesson that transcended the particular circumstances of his life. The lesson was that humility is not self-deprecation, but self-knowledge, not pretending to be less than you, or but understanding what truly matters and what does not. The lesson was that the simple virtue of knowing your own worth without needing others to affirm it is the foundation of genuine integrity. And so, my dear friend, we come to the end of our 3 tales of simple virtues. 3 stories about souls who discovered that the quiet, steady qualities of character matter more than dramatic achievements or famous names. We met Taroya, the woodcutter who chose integrity over profit, who preserved what could not be replaced, who left a legacy not of wealth, but of wisdom that continues to shape his community. 3 centuries after his death, he discovered that honesty is not just a policy, but a posture toward life, a way of being in the world that brings peace of mind and earns the respect of others. We met Mei Lin, the patient gardener who understood that true beauty requires time, who showed her husband that failure is not the end, but part of the journey, who taught her daughter that the simple virtue of patience transforms small efforts into lasting legacies. She demonstrated that waiting is not passive, but active, that trust in process is not resignation, but faith, that the bamboo strengthens its roots underground while seeming to do nothing above ground. And we met Sostratus, the humble potter who knew that true value comes not from external validation, but from internal excellence, who shared his wrong you with a competitor rather than hoarding it for himself, who taught generations of apprentices that character matters more than fame. He revealed that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less, not pretending to be nothing, but refusing to make yourself the center of everything. 3 stories, 3 different times, 3 different places, but the same timeless truth running through them all, that the simple virtues, honesty, patience, humility, are not old-fashioned relics of a simpler age, but living forces that shape lives and create legacies that endure through generations. What did these 3 souls teach us? They taught us that character is not built in dramatic moments, but in ordinary choices. They showed us that the legacy we leave behind is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give, not by how famous we become, but by how faithfully we practice the simple virtues that make life beautiful. Most importantly, they revealed to us that these simple virtues are within reach of everyone. You do not need wealth or power or fame to be honest, to be patient, to be humble. You do not need special circumstances or extraordinary opportunities. You simply need to make the choice again and again in the small moments that make up a life, to be the person you want to be, to do the thing that is right, to pursue excellence for its own sake. As you drift now into sleep, let these stories settle into your heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. Perhaps you will recognize in them faces from your own life, people who have modeled simple virtues for you, who have shown you by example what it means to live with integrity and grace. Perhaps you will remember times when you have practiced these virtues yourself, when you chose honesty over convenience, patience over frustration, humility over pride, and perhaps you will find encouragement to continue in these paths, knowing that the small choices you make today are shaping the legacy you will leave behind. Remember always that the simple virtues are not burdens to be borne, but gifts to be treasured. They bring peace to the mind, strength to the character, and beauty to the world. They are the quiet forces that transform ordinary lives into extraordinary legacies that make the world a little better, simply because someone chose to be a little better themselves. Sleep well, my dear friend. Sleep deeply, and know that whatever you face in your waking hours, you carry within you the capacity for these simple virtues, the power to be honest when it is difficult, patient when it is hard, humble when recognition is possible. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet strength that comes from living a life of simple virtues, the peace that comes from knowing you have acted with integrity, and the hope that comes from understanding that the seeds you plant today will bloom in gardens you may never see.